The idea of these webinars is to reach out to international schools, organisations, and recruitment agencies to talk about how they are making systemic changes with regards to racial equity in their institutions. So welcome, this is the 7th episode of Conversations with an International Teacher of Colour. Today I have Cece and Siaji, and they will be introducing themselves and telling us a little bit about their history, experience, and what they're currently doing. So I'm going to start with you, Cece. Can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, your experience in education, and what you're currently doing?
Okay, my name is Cece. I've been a teacher since I was 22. I guess I've been teaching now for 15 years. At the same time, I've also been an artist, like a working artist and muralist. And those two things go together because I'm the art teacher at the United World College, Thailand right now. I've been an art teacher for, I guess, 6 years. And my current role at the school is for primary visual arts, and then also coordinating all DEI things for the primary. I myself come from like 3 different countries, from Paraguay, the United States, and Brazil. And all 3 of those countries I lived prior to living here in Thailand. And I guess my background is in anthropology. That's where I went to school for anthropology in the United States. And then that's kind of informed the way that I teach art and the art that I create as well, which is very anthropological. And it's a mixing of lots of different world's cultures. It's a lot about who I am.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. I'd love to see some of your art and share it at one point after.
You want to see that art? You do. Yeah, I think you really want to see that art.
Okay, Siaji, would you like to give us a little bit of background of your experience? I've spoken to you now quite a few times anyway,
yeah.
And also your current role in your school.
I am Siaji. I've been teaching for almost 15 years, just like Cece. I'm originally from Kenya, and I have been living in Thailand for almost 12, 13 years. I've taught in international schools for as long as I've been teaching. I did a year and a half at a private school that sort of transformed to an international school as well. And then I went on to teach at international schools in Asia, in Africa as well. Currently, I work at United World College, Thailand, as a primary school language support teacher, a role that I've held there for almost 10 years. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really good to hear. I know about you. We've had quite a few conversations. We've recently been talking on Clubhouse as well, which I'm going to do another episode later on today. So I want to start with you, Cece, with this question, because I believe you are leading DEI in some capacity in your school. And so maybe you can sort of explain that role a little bit, but then also go on to this question: why is your school in particular committed to change?
Okay. So my role is primarily just coordinating the primary side of things, as far as what are our goals and our strategies for how we want to implement DEI. And our school's overall mission focuses on basically 3 different things for the primary, let's say, which is sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion, and well-being. And so for the primary, we have it set up that those 3 things are 3 areas that we focus on. And then I'm in charge of just coordinating and organizing the different people in our group for DEI. For how our school approaches it, I think Siaji would actually be a better person to answer that. He's been to school longer, and our school transferred from one style to a different style. So we moved into becoming a United World College, and Siaji was there during the transfer from one style to another. So maybe he can answer better about the overall commitment to change.
Siaji, would you like to chip in there then? I know we've had a few conversations about this already, but maybe you can give the idea about the transition, and also why the school's committed to making that change now, and your role and what you've been doing with this.
Dominic, I think I'll start by speaking about my role. I look at my role as what every teacher should be doing, in the sense that we all want to be diverse in our thinking. We all want to be diverse in how we think, and how we teach, and how we guide decision making for our students, right? So I tend to stay veer from the role as what name my role would be, but I tend to go with the practical aspect of what I do as a teacher and what I do as an individual. As far as why I think DEI is important for our school, by default, our school being a UWC, our mission is to bring nation, cultures, and people, nations, and cultures together for peace and a sustainable future. That in itself is diversity. That in itself calls for a deeper understanding of education and a deeper understanding of the world for sustainable kind of growth forever. And so most teachers, when we subscribe to coming to work at UWC, by default, we want to work towards that mission, and we embed that in our curriculum, in our teaching. So as far as why is it important, I think it's because that's our mission and that's what we live by. And for now, because of the terminologies and everything else that comes up, I think we're just looking at ways to make it better. We usually say, I think it was Maya Angelou who said, think of ways to get better, learn to get better. When you get better, do better, right? But that's not directly quoted. And that's what we want to do. We know that in a way we've just been ahead of many schools with regard to our mission, but we just want to take the next step further. We understand that even though we've been a little bit ahead in terms of us pushing for diversity, we want to be that next step, like that next step, so that people can say, look, let's go there and see what they've done. We are way, way far from being there. But, that's our kind of ultimate goal, is setting that example. I don't know if that answers the question enough, Dominic.
No, that's perfectly fine. I mean, it's clear you're on a pathway. UWC have been doing work for a while, and your school in particular have sort of have gone towards that model because that's what you believe in, and you are aware of your position right now, and where you need to go. And so that sort of leads on a little bit to the next question, and I'll ask Siaji this question again. How have you actively involved your staff? And when I talk about staff, I don't just mean teaching staff.
So you mean everybody? I think not to us, with staff, I think we are working on it. We are working on it. Part of our challenge at the moment is the language distance, in the sense that we work in a school where most of our staff doesn't really speak English, but particularly our support staff. As far as involving the teaching staff and most of the admin staff, we have done fairly okay. I think we can do better when we actively involve the support staff, but we're on that course, and there have been uncomfortable but worthy conversations that have happened, and that is something on course. I don't know if Cece, you can add on to that.
Yeah, I can just add. One thing that we thought about a lot when we started to begin our DEI journey at our school was basically, what are the priorities for our school? What are the demographics of our school? What are the challenges that we have in our unique setting? So we're a tropical island in the south of Thailand. We're not a big city. We're set up mostly for tourism, and our demographics are split between Thai, Russian, Chinese, and the greater expat community, which is very mixed. And there's a lot of mixed families, but we knew going into it that for us, we needed to tailor how our DEI was for our community. And a big challenge that we find right now is that everything that we talk about in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion is driven in the vehicle of English. And English is accessible to a lot of people, but not to everybody. And we're still tailoring, how do we speak to all the community? We have certain things that are set up really well, like our website, you go on, it can be translated into like 50 different languages for all the different things that we do. But inside the school, when we're having our conversations, we're doing our projects, we're thinking about, is everybody able to access this information? Is everybody able to provide their voice? And it's something that we think about a lot. The first things that we're doing is trying to increase the ability of Thai spoken in our whole community, but then also finding more opportunities to empower the Thai staff to speak. It's not always easy because of time constraints. Now, because of COVID, we're not all together, but that is something that we are thinking about. For the teacher point of view, for the primary, we have it set up where we have a working diversity, equity, and inclusion group. And it's quite big, and it's a mixture of teachers and teaching assistants and other staff, admin. And by bringing these groups together, we've been able to meet, once every 2 weeks, more or less. And we also meet individually in small groups when we have different projects that we want to work on. Yeah, that's kind of the setup now about how we're working with the staff. For the secondary, going into next year, we have a much broader strategy, bringing together different aspects of the school, but we're still putting all the different pieces together in COVID times, so it's all kind of compartmentalized for now.
I totally understand that. That makes sense. I just wanted to touch, you talked a little bit about your wider community, and have you actively involved them? Are there groups or committees for parents or alumni or that type of thing? And also, how about students as well?
The students, for the older students that are in our boarding house, so we have national committee students through United World College. That's part of our setup as a school, is that we have many students that are coming on scholarship from other countries and then staying together at our school. They within themselves have their own working DEI group that is led by a student lead who's in grade 11. And they take care of a lot of the different activities that the boarding house does, which is very important now when they're kind of like in lockdown situation. But then also they run the cultural weeks. So at our particular UWC, we're on a 2-year rolling system for celebrating cultural weeks based on regions. So like, for example, this year was Asia Week and Africa Week. Yeah. And so they are in charge of the planning for the secondary, but then we also work with them for some things that regard both secondary and primary, like when the students are learning about the countries from the older students that are in boarding. So we have a program like that as well. For the parents, this is something that we're working towards for the next year. We have a unique situation with our school where our school board and the owners of our school are actually the parents of our school as well. So the things that we work with DEI and when we're working with the board for overall strategy are always with the parents. So next year, when we move out of, hopefully, when we move out of COVID times into more regular setting, then we've already had the apparatus and set up for parents to have workshops on DEI, for them to meet more regularly, for them to join in the conversations that we have as staff. But for right now, they don't have a particular group per se, but that doesn't mean that the conversations aren't happening.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of schools with various models and various sort of strategies that they're using and different sort of pathways right now. And so it's great that your school's thinking about this and doing things and trying to actively put things in place. Siaji, I'd like to sort of move on to the next question, which is, how has your school created goals, if they have at all, and has this been inclusive of the parents or the students, or has that been created through like a particular group or committee or a team?
It's a bit of both. There's the overall goals, like coming up with the diversity statements and sort of guidelines. I think the broader UWC IO is coming up with, I think they call it, I'm really not very good with the terminology, but they call it Anti-Racism DEI Committee or something. And I understand that based on those guidelines, we will have to model it based on how it best fits with our community. But in terms of dismantling the overall goals of diversity and equity and inclusion, there are conversations, as Cece mentioned, that happen within small groups. We even have certain groups that we call ourselves the diversity kind of discussion group, and it started with a small group of like 6 people that were interested in learning about diversity. These were our personal goals for the year. I think certain schools call them what's that thing, appraisal, but ours, we just call them growth goals. So 4 individuals had their growth goals as learning about diversity, equity, and inclusion over the year. And this includes taking different courses here and there, and then coming and sharing. And it started with about 5. And at the moment in that group, there's about 19 individuals. So it shows that we're the tentacles are spreading. And I think the way we are headed is, in a few years, everybody will have embraced the goals, and everyone will have kind of understood what the overall goal for UWC is.
That's amazing. That or including people with conversations. You have small groups that are having these discussions, and those groups are sort of having focus training as well, which they can share with everyone. And that's important for everyone in your community to sort of know that, I'm assuming. I'm going to sort of latch on. You talked about training a little bit here, and so I'm going to speak to Cece now and ask, have you involved any outside consultants? If you have, why not? So you're shaking your head. If you have, you haven't, why haven't you?
There's a myriad of different reasons why we haven't had an outside consultant. Number one is just because of the time. That's a kind of like an easy reason why we haven't had one. It's very difficult to get somebody trained that's in Thailand, and necessarily if they're in Thailand, getting them down to Phuket during this time has been a little bit of a challenge. And then also we've had the conversation of, if somebody comes in for a short amount of time, they get to see our school. Do they really understand what are the issues and challenges in our community? Do they really understand how diversity, equity, inclusion is seen through our lens? And are they going to be able to stay here for a long time? What will the overall impact be? And we've kind of realized with these different circumstances that we have, that it's better for us to just consult ourselves and to move forward with what we feel is best as diverse individuals who have experience in the world of diversity, and we're educated, that we can make a good judgment about where our school should be and where it can go and how best we can bridge that gap that we have. We have had many conversations with other people who work in these kind of roles in other schools. We've had lots of other people there. So that way we are getting consulting from other people. Are we paying for somebody to come outside and come into our school and give us an appraisal about where we stand and what programs we can go through? No, not really. And we would maybe be open to that in the future. But as we've worked through this year in a not ideal situation, and we've gotten the bumps and the bruises of going through setting this all up, I feel that we're in our school, we just need to pull in more people inside of our actual community who understand what we're doing, who can get on board with it, and then we'll be fine and moving it forward. But that's just my own personal point of view about how we should go about fixing our own issues in our school, right? Also giving us a little bit more confidence that we rely on each other, we communicate more, we can find the solutions for our own issues, right? And also, if I can be quite frank, when we look at consultancies from other places, you know, a lot of times I feel like it's modeled on the United States idea of what is anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And while that is a very serious issue within the United States, that context is not the same context that we're in Thailand. And it doesn't necessarily play up to what we need to do. We need to prioritize, we need to effectively lead our school the best way that we see fit in these areas. And using the American model is not really going to do that. And so we rely on the many years experience that we have here on our own community and how they see diversity, equity, inclusion, which is quite different from the West, let's say. Whereas Thailand is a very diverse and rich culture, but it's presented in a homogenous way. So the talks about sharing the diversity of different cultures, it's not separated and segregated and segmented as much as you might see in the West between different cultures, where you have different pockets of different cultures, whereas Thailand has these different influences of India and of China and of the West over time. That's become this thing that has become Thai-ness. So by looking at the way that they approach mixing these different ideas in a more homogenous way, and coupling that with our own experiences, expats, and what we have the experience of diversity, equity, inclusion, we're relying more on ourselves to kind of steer our boat.
That's yeah, it's good to hear that. Siaji, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, of course, certainly. Yeah, I think I agree with Cece and the idea that specific to the current the wave of DEI or Cece, what was the other one that we learned about? Ride,
D&I, DEIJ, IED.
Yeah, specific to those, no, we haven't had a consultant come to our school, and with reasons that Cece has mentioned. But we have had consultants happening over years. I tend to see diversity as something that has existed ever since. Equity and inclusion has existed since the 1700s, right? And so anything that we do, any kind of differentiation academically, socially, culturally, we have had trainings that have happened. We probably just didn't realize that we were already working towards DEI. A good example is a few years ago, we had Dr. Virginia Royers, come to speak to our teachers about inclusion in language inclusion, and how you can include every student in the classroom regardless of their proficiency in language. And all the measures and all the agreements that we came to as a staff were aimed towards equity, in the sense that if you have a student that's nonverbal, you've got to establish ways that you can get them to access the curriculum. So yes, we have had experts come in. We just haven't realized that they have been working towards the overall goal of diversity, equity, right? But based on the past year or two, not specifically to the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion. They've just been named something different, right? I think that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally understand. And
we're kind of hoping on that approach of growing our staff that has got the training, and that we have plenty of training that's happening, particularly now in the virtual world. And we're hoping that when we have a lot of teachers that have a common goal and they're working towards different trainings, right? One of our groups, one of our diversity, equity, and inclusion groups, all we have to do is go and read an article, and we'll discuss it in 2 weeks, base it with as much research as we can, right? For example, the other day we were reading about how esports is creating a massive environment for inclusion with students, right? So those students that are usually seen as, oh yeah, it's just wasting time online, but not realizing that there are big universities all over the world that have put in a lot of budget to just have students to go and learn about gaming, you know? So when we had those discussions, we were looking at a student in our class and thinking, goodness me, like all this time you've been seeing this student just on his phone, I'm trading, and you're there, you know, holding back their education. There's steps that we will work towards, right? So hopefully we will have a massive staff based on the turnover rate of staff. We'll have loads of staff that are, sorry, trained enough and understand and work towards a common goal with inclusion and equity.
So I want to thank Cece and Siaji today. It's been an amazing conversation. We've had a few words offline as well. And so we'll hopefully do another session in the future. And yeah, thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Dominic. I appreciate this moment.